Hi, I'm Pavan. Good luck for the round.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay. For speakers, few general reminders before we start the debate. First is to remember to time yourselves. I will be keeping time and timestamps in the chat, but please do also remember to time yourselves. Second, please remember to state your preferred POI method before you start your speech, whether it be verbal or whether you like it to be from via chat. Please let the other participants or debaters in this round know as well. Thirdly is to remember to be mindful of your language and be very respectful to each other. I know debating can be competitive, but we want to be very respectful towards each other. So yeah. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the first speaker from proposition side to deliver their speech. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. So, um, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The whole purpose of an economic bloc or an intergovernmental bloc itself is to protect each other from any single threat. Therefore, we believe that the importance of militarization in the current world is definitely a necessity for the whole bloc in itself. But before that, I'd like to continue with telling you what I like to do in my speech. So firstly, I would like to set the case for the government side, and lastly, giving you my one point of argumentation under the key phrase of the need for militarization for the ASEAN bloc. But before that, let's understand ASEAN. Let's look at the characterization, right? So ASEAN bloc, we like to define it as a bloc which has a non-interference policy, right? Meaning that right now, ASEAN is the type of bloc that does not really involve itself actively with a conflict within like other regions. And secondly, ASEAN bloc is to promote peace and stability within the region, right? Meaning that they will try anything to like help and maintain the stability within all the countries in itself. Now, regarding demilitarization, we like to define it as to create an army or like military for the whole ASEAN bloc. For example, like NATO, right? NATO has their own army that helps to protect it in case if there are any external threat coming to like harm any of the countries within it. Now, what's the stance coming from our side is that we want to promote national security for the bloc, for all the countries in the bloc. Now, we will prove to you two things. Firstly, what is the necessity of militarization for the ASEAN bloc? And secondly, what are the harms if we did not put the militarization for the bloc? Well, the side of opposition would like them to prove to us was it necessarily bad for them to like militarize in the first place. Now, let's understand the status quo of ASEAN right now. So we really like three things for ASEAN, right? Firstly, ASEAN has been in a tight spot in the current world, meaning that they are facing more and more threats and like tension. For example, the South China Sea dispute and also like the Myanmar fights, right? So that Myanmar is like one of the country in ASEAN, so that when they don't have a stable militarization military for the ASEAN bloc in itself, they are unable to protect themselves in the first place. Now, secondly, they have a sole focus on economic prosperity, meaning that they have this intergovernmental organization to help boost each other's economy. However, they dismiss the protection against threats because we need to understand that right now, ASEAN consists of many of the small countries which do not have a very stable military in the first place. They do not have a professional trained military exercise. Therefore, it is very potentially high risk of them to be threatened by external threats. Now, thirdly, small countries cannot defend themselves, and this is what will affect the bloc in the first place. Because right now, when a small countries or any countries in a bloc is affected, their whole trading process is going to be affected, and their whole economy is going to collapse, which goes against the whole purpose of ASEAN itself, which is to protect each regional stability as well as economic prosperity of the countries in itself. However, for the big countries' cases, they have to contribute more. For example, like Indonesia, right? They are a big country, they have a good economy, and also they also have already their military exercises. However, if they are the sole country that have to protect the whole region, it is very unfair and very imbalanced for the country because it's going to strain their spendings and military power. So it's going to cause an imbalanced regional power. Now, what is this debate about, right? So we believe that this debate is just how we support the creation of military for the whole ASEAN bloc, and I'm going to tell you what are the necessities for it. Now, moving on to my argument, the need for militarization. Why is it true? two things. Firstly, because ASEAN has been in the hot water of impending threats, like I've told you. For example, the South China Sea dispute, which actively impact ASEAN because ASEAN is one of the closest region within the sea. And secondly, is regarding the North Korean aggression, right? Meaning that Malaysia has even experienced one of the tension between the North Korea where North Korea could threaten Malaysia in any way. However, to compare the nuclear weapons or powers between Malaysia and the North Korea itself, of course,
Point, please.
the small countries like us will never get over. No thanks. So, and then also things like Taiwan military conflicts, which affects Southeast Asia country in the first place. So we believe that these are the things that ASEAN needs to take into account and have this type of militarization. Now, if they want to say to us, oh, it's going to be hard because they have to spend a lot of money and they have to be ready to make military exercises, so it's going to be impossible for them to make. We say that we counter this point right there and then, because right now they are investing. They have a stable economy in the first place, like these countries in ASEAN, right? So they will invest and try to create the military for the ASEAN bloc. And also right now, ASEAN itself has already created their own military joint exercises. It's just not created as just one bloc. So right now we say that it's for the betterment if they just do a whole military army for the whole bloc. Now, secondly, ASEAN has always been promoting non-interference and non-violent policy, right? We say that this is good. However, these are the reason why ASEAN needs a military in the first place. Because with this type of ideology, right, with this type of policy, they are more inclined to get more threats from the other country. Because right now, country will only perceive ASEAN as a very passive bloc, a very passive economic bloc who will not do anything and will not react if any type of threats will happen. So we believe that, for example, ASEAN not involving actively in Israel and Palestinian conflicts, or they are depending on fair treaties with other countries in order to not cause any conflict. So we believe that that's the reason of the need for militarization. Now, why is it good, right? Okay, so this is important. This is good for the militarization because ASEAN regions does not have a strong military power in the first place. They just depend on individual countries like Indonesia, like I've stated, right? So we believe that this will only put a burden on that certain country to protect the whole region, which consists of many other countries. So this is going to cause imbalanced military spending, right? We say that militarization is good and also important because right now the spending, the budget and spending to help protect the country together can be easily shared by all countries, can be easily contributed by all countries, so that not only one country that is considered as big and have a good military exercise have to contribute solely. So this will reduce the strain on countries like Indonesia. And also unstable military involvement, for example, right? Not all countries are contributing to be in the military, then is going to be unable to protect from potential threats because not all countries are going to be involved to protect their threats. Now, what are the impacts for this? Firstly, is the national security, because it's going to be stronger, because right now we are going to have more professionalized trainings for the military, given that now we're going to have a strong military from all countries contributing for the budgets to buy weapons and whatnot. So we are going to have a professionalized trainings so that the national security is going to be stronger. Secondly, we have a balanced protection because we have a balanced contribution as well as military spending. And last but not least, we have no regional conflicts, or at least reduce regional conflicts in the ASEAN bloc, because right now we don't have any imbalance of protection within the regional bloc. So to conclude, we believe that militarization is very, very much needed and important for the protection of ASEAN. With that, I think.
All right, thank you so much, first speaker from proposition side, for that speech. I would like to now invite first speaker from opposition side to deliver their speech. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me just skip. Starting my speech in 3, 2. Okay, I'll accept verbal POIs, by the way. Pronouns he, him. Starting my speech in 3, 2, One. After Prime Minister ended her speech, I'm unclear why they protect the ASEAN bloc, because what I think they do is that they threaten sovereignty. Here's why regional stability falls on their side, because it is tempting to imagine a future where militarizing the ASEAN bloc would secure regional power and ensure our safety in a volatile world. But the reality is far more complicated, right? Because what they risk on side government is setting this kind of notion where the dangerous arms race that destabilize the nation. They worsen diplomatic relations and they compromise the long-standing peace and economic growth that ASEAN has worked hard to build. For all of these reasons, I'm incredibly proud to oppose, right? What is our stance on opposition then? We'd rather focus on diplomatic ties and economic cooperation for the long-term sustainability of the ASEAN bloc. So there'll be two constructive arguments coming from the opposition bench. Firstly, on why the militarization of ASEAN undermines the core principles of peace and diplomacy that have defined the bloc's success in the first place. And secondly, why focusing on economic and diplomatic cooperation is far more effective and sustainable path for the regional security. But before I get into my arguments, let me just engage with the best of proposition, right? So the proposition wants you to believe that militarizing the ASEAN will enhance regional security and offer a strong deterrent against the external threats, like they said, China's increasing assertiveness on the South China Sea. But here's the problem with this statement, right? Because deterrence doesn't always lead to stability, it often escalates into conflict. Because just look at the arms race between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, right? Because instead of making the world safer, it literally heightened the tensions and they brought us closer to nuclear disaster. The same thing is likely going to happen in Southeast Asia, right? Because militarization might provoke more aggression rather than prevent it,
I'm sorry,
especially
but
when
like-
dealing with unpredictable actors. Am I okay? Hello? I think you're the one who's wait, am I like
I think you're okay. You can proceed. Yeah.
okay. I'll just proceed again. I stopped at 1 minute 46 seconds.
Yep.
All right. Gonna continue my speech again. They're not inclined to get threats because, if anything, the Western countries want them to have economic cooperation with them and not harm them, right? But secondly, we think that they tell you that ASEAN needs to militarize to maintain sovereignty over territorial disputes, right? But history literally showed us that military confrontations, they rarely solve these issues because, in fact, they often prolong them. Look at the conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, right? Which has led to militarize for decades with no resolution in this side. That's why the proposition fails to recognize that military solution to territorial disputes, it just leads to protracted conflicts, you get counterproductive results and not peace. But secondly, they romanticize the idea that ASEAN could have a regional power like NATO, but they overlook the diversity within ASEAN itself. Because look at it, countries like Cambodia and Laos, they have very different priorities, they're very different diplomatic interests compared to Singapore or Vietnam. That's why forcing a military alliance is not going to be good at the end of the day, right? But moving on to my first argument then about why militarization undermines ASEAN's core principle of diplomacy and peace. So okay, the problem in the argument is that right now, ASEAN is primarily a diplomatic and economic coalition, right? So built on the principles of non-interference, they're built on regional cooperation, they're built on peace, as they also said, right? But this has allowed the region to thrive despite its diverse political systems and cultures. That's why militarizing the bloc, it just fundamentally changed this dynamic. What happens then is you shift the bloc from dialogue to deterrence on their side of the house and fracturing relationships both within the ASEAN with external powers like the US and China. So why do we think this is harmful, right? We think for three reasons. Firstly, let's look at the historical examples first, because we've seen this happen for so many times, right? When Eastern European countries like Poland and Hungary began to militarize after joining NATO, it escalated tensions with Russia. That's why the Ukraine problem, the crisis in Ukraine, was so harmful. The proposition is so naive to think that military buildup in Southeast Asia would not provoke similar reactions from powerful neighbors like China, right? But secondly, we think it's about diplomatic fallout too, because demilitarization literally signals to other countries that ASEAN is preparing for war. They don't want peace, right? This will force countries like China and the US to respond with their own military posturing. That's why you increase the risk of accidental confrontations on their counterfactual, because history is full with examples. Just look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? ASEAN's current diplomatic mechanisms are built on peace. So why would the proposition want to throw that away just for militaristic bricksmanship, right? But thirdly, we think of internal fragmentation, because now the internal cohesion of ASEAN will suffer. Member states have vastly different economic and political interests. Some have stronger ties to China, others to the US, right? So that's why militarization forces them to pick sides. That's why you weaken the unity that has allowed ASEAN to function for so long. But how comparatively our side is going to better this, right? Because on our side, we actually preserve ASEAN's focus on the diplomatic dialogue and economic cooperation. These tools have worked for decades. So we continue to prioritize mechanisms like the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ARF, where countries actually come together and discuss security issues. issues and avoid escalation. Because instead of making other countries think that we're just a huge threat, we're like the big one here, right? We're not going to push this idea that we're going to harm them. So this looks like policy frameworks and governing national and regional policies, because now each ASEAN member state will now have to develop national policies that aligns with regional goals. That's why these policies, they focus on areas like trade, their investments, infrastructure, their education, which the things that side of proposition was trying to argue, but we do it better, right? That's why we push for diplomatic engagement in the South China Sea rather than military confrontation. We follow the code of the conduct that ASEAN has already originally set in status quo. So what is the comparative analysis, right? Because on our side of the house, we will have a less fragmented thing where we actually don't militarize our own, so we don't look like a threat to other countries. That's why we have more peace on our side. Moving on to my second argument then about the economic and diplomatic cooperation is about a better counterfactual than security, right? Because I want to talk about why focusing on these kind of things is way better. Because in the status quo, the proposition seems to think that military buildup is the only way to ensure security. But note how this ignores the larger roles that economic interdependence and diplomacy play in preventing conflict. Because look at status quo. Southeast Asian strength comes from the economic ties, right? Not just within the ASEAN, but with global superpowers like China, the Japan, and US. That's why the region has benefited immensely from being a hub of the global trade, and its security has been derived from economic importance and not its military might. So why do you think this military focus is misguided, right? We think it's three things. Number one, on the economic vulnerability, because militarizing ASEAN could lead to economic isolation, especially with China, right? Which is ASEAN's literal largest trading partner. Countries like Laos and Cambodia, who depend heavily on Chinese investment, will be reluctant to join with militarization and may even pull out from ASEAN together. You ruin ASEAN on their side of the house. That's why it's not very a good thing to look at, right? But secondly, on the diplomatic fallout with the China and the US, because ASEAN's value lies in its ability to mediate between powers like China and the US. That's why militarization risks turning the region into another battleground for these superpowers, as we've seen in other parts of the world like Syria or Yemen even too. And so instead of playing a balancing role, ASEAN will just become another pawn in global military strategies. But thirdly, we think it's because of the loss of ASEAN's unique position, right? Because the world values ASEAN as a neutral diplomatic actor. Militarizing them is going to it's going to erode that reputation. You lead to less influence on the global stage. That's why ASEAN has historically been a mediator in crisis, like the Rohingya situation and the South China disputes. This would no longer be possible in a militarized ASEAN. So how would our side solve this then? Because on our side, we focus on strengthening the economic ties and using diplomacy as a tool for security. I mean, take for example, by deepening economic partnerships through ASEAN free trade agreements and maintaining the neutral diplomatic relations with both China and the US. So we are neutral here, we don't harm anyone, right? So that's why is this better on our side of the house? Because on side of government, militarization risks regional destabilization. We do not risk the economic downturns and the loss of ASEAN's global influence. On our side of the house, diplomacy and economic growth, we ensure that region remains stable. We make sure that we are prosperous and influential at the end of the day. The choice is clear because our counterfactual is safer, it is more stable, and it is more prosperous at the end of the day. For all of these reasons, I'm incredibly proud to oppose. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. First speaker from opposition for that speech. I'd like to now invite the second speaker from proposition to deliver their speech. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, since you are.
I would prefer the POI to be given verbally. Now we can see that in status quo, right? Russia is invading Ukraine, and because and Ukraine can't do anything but watch their nation deteriorate day by day as a whole. And the question is it not really right that Russia is invading Ukraine? No. And is Ukraine prepared for the attacks coming their way? No. Necessarily imagine this case scenario on ASEAN as a bloc, right? We said it will be really harmful, and that's why we are proposing that ASEAN bloc should be militarized. Before that, some responses that I have towards opposition side, right? First, they give you an example on how Laos and Cambodia, these are some of the countries that depend on China economically. We say that these are exactly the pushing stone that the ASEAN needs to be militarized, because the harms of these nations, right? In the case of the harms of this nation, depending on China example, right? The harms in this nation is that in the case of threat and in the case of no threat, right? The dependency on the countries, right, that actively attacks and prioritizes self-growth, right, while having no secure self-defense is harmful in itself. Meanwhile, under our rule, right, this as a whole is as an ASEAN bloc, right? In the first place, right, these countries, they depend on each other for economic growth. They depend on each other. They have their own diplomatic ties in the first place. They depend on each other economically. So we believe that all of these questions on depending on or not, right, they are depending on China. But we say that if in the first place, if they do not have secure national security and self-defense, we say that this will be really harmful towards this country. Okay. So the side of opposition also say that there will be diversity. Diversity will be one of the factors that militarization will not happen, right? We say that is not true, because the main reason why we militarize is that it is a priority to protect ASEAN as a whole bloc. That is exactly the main. That should be exactly the interest of every. That should be exactly the interest of every single nation in that ASEAN bloc in itself. How do you say that diversity will be one of the factors that actually make militarization of ASEAN bloc not happening? Because we say that when the priority is to protect ASEAN as a whole bloc, right, in the sector of security, we say that it's in the interest of every single nation in ASEAN in itself. And it's about how if we militarize ASEAN as a bloc, it will provoke reactions from China. In the first place, China is provoked by the 9-line conflict. China is already positioned to attack ASEAN in the first place. And ASEAN needs to fight for their own rights. There is some lands that is actually that China is trying to claim from ASEAN. And what is ASEAN going to do? ASEAN is going to just declare that, we'll just give this to China. This will further harm their side, and this will just make ASEAN not be taken seriously anymore. Moving on to my first point, on exactly what is the harms of not militarizing the ASEAN bloc. So we'll see that without militarization, right, the ASEAN bloc will be vulnerable to threats. Why? Because there is a conflict with other powerful countries, right? ASEAN. Example, right, there will be in a scenario where there will be conflict with other powerful countries with powerful military bases and nuclear weapon. ASEAN, we say that comparatively, ASEAN does not have strong military, and ASEAN is a non-nuclear zone, meaning that they don't have all of this nuclear power, and they have a non-interference policy. So in the first place, we say that without militarization, how can ASEAN prepare for the worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario of attacking, which we say that in status quo, it's already possible because of the 9-line. No, thank you. Because of the 9-line issue, right? Okay. So so ASEAN have always been a bloc that chooses the peaceful way out of conflict, and at times this will work. But sometimes, in the worst case scenario, right, ASEAN as a bloc is not going to be ready to be attacked by powerful countries that have nuclear power, that have stronger military bases, and they cannot just negate the harms. So, but clarification, right? We are not prioritizing radical ways of solving conflicts. We are just preparing for the worst case scenario. We believe that under our side, diplomacy and diplomatic ties and peaceful way out is still possible, but we are just preparing ourselves for the worst case scenario, which is under their rule, right? ASEAN is at very high risk of being harmed, and they can't do anything about it. Second point on why it is in the interest of ASEAN to be militarized, right, is in the interest of ASEAN as a whole bloc itself, right? Because ASEAN, right, they don't have a strong military power, right? Because example, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam. If example, right, imagine you are one of the powerhouses, right? Imagine you are China and US you are having a conversation, and people bring up like, there's Myanmar, there is Philippines, there is Vietnam. These countries actually trying to attack us. Will they be scared? No, they won't be scared. But if in the scenario where these powerhouses like this powerful country wants to take what they want in the issue, comparatively, we see Russia just invades Ukraine because it is in their own interest, right? Example, if China have the interest of taking this land from ASEAN itself, right? They will just take it, and if ASEAN retaliates, what they will do, they will send attacks. They will be radical. It will be there will be physical harms and towards the nations of ASEAN itself, and and ASEAN will always be known as the weak developing countries that chooses the peaceful way out because they are not strong enough to handle radical harms. We believe that it is not necessarily bad that ASEAN always chooses the peaceful way out, but the problem is that ASEAN is in itself is not prepared to counter the harms in the case of being attacked by major powerful country. So when ASEAN they unite as a bloc to have a military, first, the weak countries in ASEAN itself will have military support coming from other countries as in ASEAN as a bloc, right? So ASEAN will have a strong military base because militarization only means that there will be a huge base of trained army and resources shared between the nations in the ASEAN bloc itself. And we say that that is really beneficial and really really impactful towards the national security of this ASEAN itself. And we believe that under our role, what we want at the end of the day is that at the end of the day, we want an enhanced national security, which is not exclusive under the ASEAN, meaning that when they are attacked by China, right, ASEAN is attacked by China, they cannot counter the attack and just slowly watch the nation deteriorate. And under their side, they are fighting for diplomatic ties, which we believe that not exclusive under their side, because under our side, we can also solve diplomatic ties in itself. Therefore, I've never been proud to propose this.
All right, thank you so much, second speaker from proposition side for that speech. I'd like to now invite the second speaker from opposition side to deliver their speech. Here.
Am I audible at this moment?
Yes, as well.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Wait, okay. POIs verbally, okay? Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I fundamentally disagree with proposition when they tell us that militarizing ASEAN will protect the region and preserve peace. They told you here, they paint a picture of strength to force, but this isn't the reality that we face. Rather than securing stability, militarization will only heighten tensions and lead to an arms race, which makes the region far more volatile. We tell you here, the government's whole entire case collapses the moment when they believe that military powers equals to more security. What they fail to recognize here is that ASEAN's real strength lies in its diplomacy ties and its ability to resolve conflicts without violence. As soon as they propose militarizations, they've already lost, because when they abandon the core of ASEAN's identity, peace through cooperation. So instead of ensuring security, they're inviting danger by escalating tensions, not reducing them. Our case is already very simple. ASEAN's power comes from its ability to mediate, negotiate, and resolve conflicts through peaceful means. We already told you from our first speaker that militarization will only pull ASEAN into dangerous geopolitical conflicts, especially between major powers like China and the US. We've already shown you that ASEAN bloc should stick to its neutral diplomatic roots that have ensured peace for all of these years. Their side, they're tactically set at abandoning this neutrality and throwing us into a more dangerous and a more volatile world. So we tell you here, do not let side government here convince you that military strength is the only way to keep ASEAN safe. Their side here completely fails to acknowledge the long-term consequences of militarization, a divided ASEAN, more regional instability, and a higher risk of external manipulation. We've already made it very clear that diplomacy is the foundation of ASEAN's success. So we tell you here, if this side completely ignores this and insists on military buildup, they completely loses this debate. We stand by a peaceful and a cooperative ASEAN that continues to thrive without resorting to arms. Three things in my speech: rebuttals against their side, one argument for our side, work comparison, and summarization. Now, moving to our rebuttals then, the first point of contention is that this idea of militarizing ASEAN will act as a deterrent to larger powers like China, but we tell you this is completely misleading. You cannot tell me that having more guns, ships, and troops won't just intimidate superpowers. They already have more resources and military might the entire ASEAN bloc combined. What militarization does is to provoke those superpowers to respond in kind, creating an arms race. What this doesn't make us safer, it makes us a target for greater hostilities. ASEAN's strength lies in diplomacy and cooperation, not just firepower. So we tell you here, building military strength only escalates the risk of conflict rather than deterring it. There's an assumption that we are left here. Okay, no army. Actually, every ASEAN country have their own military system, and isn't that enough? Like, let's say our country, Malaysia and Thailand. What we don't need here is a formation or coalition of military for ASEAN bloc. Isn't that what side your side is aiming for? Doesn't that make us our side more symmetrical on both sides? Now, second of all, they claim that militarization will unite the bloc, but it does the complete opposite. ASEAN is a diverse group of nations with different security priorities and threats. Militarization imposes a uniform response to unique national issues. For instance, Singapore's security concerns differ vastly in those of Laos. This means that pushing for a militarized ASEAN fractures internal unity because of each nation will prioritize its own military objectives over collective regional goals, further weakening the bloc's whole diplomatic power. And third of all, they argue that militarization will bolster ASEAN's standing in the global community. But we tell you, we do not measure the influence by tanks and missiles alone. ASEAN has already successfully positioned itself as a neutral mediator in global disputes, and that soft power has served far more better than any military presence could. So by militarizing, we can throw away years of diplomatic credibility and risk being seen as yet another geopolitical player caught up in the power struggles between giants like China and US. Moving on to our argument that how militarization completely weakens ASEAN's whole diplomatic identity. Let's talk about the heart of this issue. Why militarizing ASEAN is a whole step backward. ASEAN has already been a diplomatic powerhouse. We tell you here, the world looks to ASEAN as a model of how diverse countries can come together to solve problems without violence. So if we militarize, we completely lose the identity and shift towards a mindset of conflict instead of cooperation. The desire of militarization comes from fear of growing external threats, particularly from China's aggressive actions in South China Sea. But when you're responding to the fear that with weapons, it's a complete no solution. When you militarize, you're no longer neutral. You're choosing a side, and that makes you a whole bigger target. ASEAN's beauty lies in its ability to work with both China and the West, maintaining a balance of power without resorting to force. So once militarization happens, we're no longer talking about peaceful negotiations. We're talking about military standoffs. Countries within ASEAN will feel more pressure to increase their own military spending, leading to a more internal competition and division. Worse, bigger powers like China will see that as a threat and escalate their military presence in the region. We will have a more dangerous spiral of military buildup, which moves us to a more closer conflict, not peace. The biggest impact here is that ASEAN will lose its role as a stabilizing force in Southeast Asia. Instead of being a beacon of peaceful conflict resolution, ASEAN will be dragged into the very conflicts it has worked so hard to avoid. Imagine an ASEAN where countries like Indonesia or Vietnam are forced to choose military alliances, breaking the whole unity that has always been its hallmark. Even if militarization does provide some short-term deterrence, the long-term damage to ASEAN's unity, peace, and diplomatic stress is far more greater. The loss of ASEAN's neutral identity will create more risk than rewards. Our side here preserves Asian integrity and ability to mediate, while theirs puts a path of complete division and a complete conflict. At the end of the day, our side here would be more better. On our side, ASEAN remains a strong united bloc that continues to lead to dialogue, diplomacy, and cooperation. We can avoid the trap of militarization, which has proven time to time again to lead more instability and conflict. But on your side, ASEAN just becomes another militarized bloc, entangled in external power struggles, losing its unique position as a neutral mediator. Militarization would just make ASEAN a more bigger target, not a safer one. So in our world, ASEAN continues to be a more force of peace and more stability. But in your world, we lose that and we lose the very essence of what makes ASEAN successful. So as a summary, we've proven that militarization in ASEAN does not lead to more security, but it leads to more division, conflict, and destabilization. ASEAN's true strength lies in its own diplomatic identity. We've already shown you how militarization triggers an arms race and forces ASEAN to choose sides, destroying its role as a neutral, peaceful bloc. We tell you this is super important here because ASEAN's future must be built on peace, cooperation, and unity, not military force. So we tell you, if we sacrifice that for weapons only, we may sacrifice everything ASEAN stands for. So let's not forget, ASEAN was built on peace, and peace will carry it forward. Militarization is not the answer. Diplomacy is. So even if they tell you, even if you take the best case and assume militarization does provide all of these deterrence and all of those, we have to face the bigger picture here. ASEAN's strength is in its soft power and its ability to navigate complex international relations without picking sides. Militarism will just destroy this whole neutral position. Once ASEAN becomes militarized, we risk becoming pawns in the power of bigger nations, whether that's China, US, or even Russia. ASEAN's country would just be pressured into military alliances dividing the whole bloc and making us more vulnerable, not more secure, which on your side would prevail, but on our side, we will have more stable, more peace, and all of that. For all of these reasons, so proud to, of course, side with us. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Second speaker from proposition side for the speech. I'd like to now invite the second speaker. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Opposition. I'd like to invite third speaker from proposition to deliver their speech. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'll be starting my speech in 3. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side of opposition clearly does not understand how ASEAN right now is currently in the hot water of impending threats, as we have continuously mentioned in our previous speeches. We think that the resolution that we provide under our side of the house is better in terms of ASEAN, in terms of not only military power but also growth as a bloc at the end of the day. 3 things I'll be doing today. I'll be stating to you the issues that we have with the opposition side. I'll be providing you the main clash of today's debate and why it goes to our side, why it goes better in the best interest of ASEAN in our side. And lastly, I'll be giving you a brief summarization of both cases. Now, moving on towards the issues that we have with the opposition, right? They keep the main issue. One of the issues that we have with the opposition side is that they keep mentioning how militarization will trigger external powers, and they give you the example of the US, the China, and how making us establishing a military within ASEAN will lead to conflict with external powers such as ASEAN, such as China and US. We say that this is irrelevant and merely an assumption. Why? Because number one, ASEAN, when we want to militarize ASEAN, it means that ASEAN right now is just being implemented as a military bloc, meaning that bigger countries such as US and China that have already succeeded in terms of both economic threat just like that, especially if they were already on a neutral basis in the first place. And let's look at an analogy, right? When you debut as a novice actor, especially if you're private industry in the first place, as a bigger country, as a bigger power, especially such as US, China, you will not look at something that is just being established as a threat to you, at the end of the day, even if it will cause because of the nature of a bigger power as being, you will only a threat if you trigger them at the end of the day. Meaning, if you do something that triggers them, such as, for example, which is direct, right? Then we say that will at the end of the day, which is why we as a military bloc is only so that they can provide a national security within the bloc, meaning that they will not attack random countries just like that, especially acknowledging bigger countries such as US, China, UK, France, Russia, and etc. etc. And secondly, we tell you that the militarizing ASEAN will not make countries that have close relations to ASEAN cut ties, such as China, right, becomes but in the end, it can become an advantage to them at the end of the day, and this will be later elaborated in my clashes. Now, what has the opposition side said to you in their speeches, right? They tell you on how diplomatic and economic cooperation, but we tell you in the interest of right now of the status and the state of ASEAN being in a dispute, especially one of the bigger and ongoing disputes such as South China Sea dispute right now. We tell you that
Can you pause for a bit? Sorry, interrupt.
is much more needed compared to diplomatic and economic cooperation, especially when you look at right now, the South China Sea has not been resolved with the existing problem.
Sorry, I think you're lagging a bit. I'm
Sorry?
not sure if it's just me.
Yeah, you've also been cutting out on my end.
Yeah, I think you're a bit lagging. I had you stop at 3:54. Can you possibly check your connection? Yeah.
Okay, give me just a second. Hello, is it better?
For now, yes. So I think it should be fine.
Okay. I'll just restart my speech then.
Mm-hmm.
At the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll restart my speech in 3, 2, 1. Looking at the current dispute, looking at the current state of ASEAN right now, we say that wanting to focus on diplomatic and economic cooperation solely is not going to be enough to resolve this issue at the end of the day, which is why we say that it is needed for us to militarize ASEAN at the end of the day, thus existing our case on our side of the house. Now, moving on towards moving on towards the main clash in today's debate, right? Is it necessary or not for you to militarize ASEAN at the end of the day? On our side of the house, we say that it is necessary. Why? Because number one, ASEAN as a bloc does not have a stable military power. Secondly, ASEAN as individual regions within the bloc also do not have strong military power. For example, you have stronger countries such as Singapore, but you also have countries such as Laos, Cambodia, Brunei, etc., which are smaller in terms of country as a whole, right? So what happens then is that it creates a gap between ASEAN countries in terms of capability, right? So when we create a military bloc for the ASEAN bloc as a whole, if we do not create a military bloc within the ASEAN bloc, you have countries who can protect themselves, their own country, and you also have countries who cannot because of the difference in the capability of each respective countries. So why is it necessary then? Is that number one, it promotes national security within the bloc, where we say that stronger countries can help weaker countries and at the end of the day provide a more stronger and stable security for ASEAN as a whole. And second, it also creates a more peaceful environment within the ASEAN bloc, which is important as a resolution to both internal and external conflicts at the end of the day. But second, even if you want to say that it's not necessary because you already have a bloc, even if blocs like NATO exist, right? We have conflicts that threaten ASEAN that might not involve NATO in the first place. For example, South China Sea dispute, which occurs between ASEAN and China, North Korea issue, Taiwan issue, and etc. etc. Meaning that ASEAN cannot rely solely on an external body to resolve these conflicts for themselves. But not only that, it also might not be in the interest of these countries to want to resolve these conflicts for the other countries. But what happens when you don't militarize ASEAN as a ASEAN bloc, right, is that it can cause internal conflict. Because understand right now, in current status quo, Indonesia is the only country in ASEAN to have a military power, right? So it puts a strain on burden on Indonesian by being the only country within the whole ASEAN bloc to have a military power, right? So what happens is that it creates an imbalanced military spending, military spending because of the nature of ASEAN as an interdependent bloc, meaning that if a small country or a country in general, right, gets attacked by another external power, it will affect the whole bloc as a whole, meaning that it won't affect the countries individually, but it will affect the whole bloc as a whole, and thus affect the economy, the growth, social and everything for the whole bloc as a whole. So we say that then that it becomes harmful. So why is it in the best interest of ASEAN to create a military? Is that it creates a better national security for ASEAN, and it also helps ASEAN develop as a bloc. And with that, I've never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, third speaker from proposition side, for that speech. I'd like to now invite the third speaker from opposition side to deliver their speech. You're here.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Let me try to open my mic. Ooh, it's quite dark. Okay, give me a second. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, so I'll take verbal POIs. Okay, so I'd like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the problem statement in today's debate is not about whether militarization in these 10 Asian countries in the Asian bloc is a good thing or a bad thing, right? But instead focuses on the idea of whether militarization is actually so needed to be prioritized, and whether militarization would actually help benefit these countries in the first place, right? So before I move on to my speech, I would like to note that we tell you that these Asian bloc countries will still have militarization on their own, right? For example, in Malaysia and Thailand, and as you mentioned, in Indonesia. But we tell you by simply focusing all of those said regions' resources into militarization will actually not amount to any benefits, right? A failed investment, you could say. So now I will move on to my rebuttals. Your side mentioned on how, military will increase the defense of a country, but we tell you this is simply not actually going to help on your side's case, as you have yet to actually prove on how, in what way you will actually do this, right? Instead, our method would actually achieve this better and faster in the first place, being diplomatic ties and yeah. So your side also mentioned the example of how Ukraine is being invaded by Russia simply because of a lack of military. But what I find funny about this statement is, as my first speaker in their speech have already basically responded to this, we tell you that the diplomatic ties will be able to help with this problem, right? In fact, UAE is only here today simply because for one sole reason, and that is because they have ties and they have diplomatic relationships with the US, being the sole factor of why they are able to fight back against Russia in the first place, right? So your side also mentioned on how China can invade us at any time, right? But we tell you that they simply will not have the incentive to do so in the first place, right? And they're not just going to invade a random country at any point, right? Okay. Your side also mentioned on how you're simply preparing for the worst case. And that sums up your entire case, basically. They're so paranoid to the point where they're willing to throw everything away for the premise of preparing for a worst case scenario, which we already tell you it's incredibly unlikely to happen. But then we also tell you that if it did happen, right, you can currently combine all of the ASEAN bloc's resources and economy and all of their military systems, and we tell you they will still not stand any chance against the US. So we tell you, instead of actually, throwing everything away, we should find a better problem to actually solve this for the long run. Right? And so, first off, your status quo is already incredibly flimsy. And as I mentioned again, China and Russia, as the examples you've mentioned, and the USA, they will simply not, invade the Asian bloc for no arbitrary reason, right? So, and there are ICC laws and so on to actually prevent them from doing this in the first place, right? And yeah, okay, so now I'll move on to my clashes, right? So the main clash in today's debate is whether militarization would actually benefit these said countries, right? We tell you that militarization will fail. Note that aside from Singapore, the other 9 countries which are consisted of the Asian bloc are still developing countries, right? So we think that militarization of these Asian bloc will actually fail for two. Sure.
Is it better if these countries that ASEAN, they don't have any security to begin with, because you see that the security won't even this
stop,
power
stop.
will not even
We
stand
already
against
tell
US.
you, right? Okay, stop. We tell you already. One, you don't need militarization to be the only security. We already tell you that diplomatic ties and the relationship with other countries will also be able to help strengthen the security of these countries, which you simply cannot get for some reason, right? Okay. On to the first point of why militarization fails. One, it would be a futile attempt for these Asian bloc to focus on militarization because one, we believe that this would actually not bring any benefits or the profit to the country and its people on the ground, right? Hence, this proving its sustainability. We have already mentioned that this, in my first speaker's case, how it would actually cause diplomatic fallout. For example, in Poland and Hungary, which has tried to do so and militarize their country after joining an ATO with Russia, what happens is these countries end up suffering economically and politically at the end, right? It does not actually gain any other benefits. So what actually will happen if these Asian blocs militarize their country, if they are seen and is seen as a threat by the entire global regions? We tell you that if you draw your sword at the entire world, you can't expect the world to simply take that and move on with their day, right? So we tell you that instead of actually advocating for protection and security, quote unquote protection and security, Psy government will actually end up starting World War III instead. Okay, so two of why militarization failed. It would actually harm the people on the ground and the parties involved with the Asian bloc in the first place, right? So what will this actually look like? We tell you that militarization will then be the catalyst of what we like to call internal fragmentation. This is as mentioned by my first speaker, this is when conflict starts to occur within the parties of the Asian in the first place due to the country's differences in economic and political ties. Like how some countries in Asia have different economic backgrounds and sustainability, and stability, and some countries have different relationships with other countries, right? So this is incredibly important because we tell you that this will not only worsen the economic stability of these weaker countries of Asia. In what way, right? We tell you that conflict and war are never good for a country, and stability in terms of economy and how. Two, this would actually simply create a chain effect which causes conflict between these said Asian countries in the first place, right? So we do not see how militarization will actually benefit the country, as by my first speaker has mentioned time and time again. This will indirectly affect the people on the ground, and these said stakeholders do not have the economic background, most of them do not, to actually be able to take this without any backlash, right? Which is another reason why we think militarization of these Asian countries will not be sustainable. Whereas Psy government comes to tell us that Asian countries do not have enough defense to actually defend themselves from the outside threat. But we have already told you that this will simply actually instead, militarization will actually put a burden to these already incredibly weak countries because these countries simply do not have the resources to waste on anything but development, right? And even if they were to raise resources on these military power, it would actually simply not amount to anything when you compare it to these newly founded military power compared to actual, powerful military parties, right? And we tell you that the military power is simply not necessary for the country's development and sustainability. If you look at Singapore, right, we tell you that it doesn't need a strong military system to be first world, but what it actually does need is political ties and relationship with other countries. And that is why it's considered first world, right? And second, we tell you that Psy government needs to prove to us on how they can actually prove of this method's sustainability and how it will actually benefit the country towards its development and not harm the country instead, right? So South government can not just come here and tell us that they will militarize these said countries without any framing of how they will actually do it, and tell us that it will actually solve the current problem, and tell us that it will actually help solve the current problem, which they will not, such as poverty and other social problems, right? So now to case comparison. So far from our side, we have told you that our methods of prioritizing economic development, political ties of these countries will be able to help out in the Asian bloc, right? We tell you that our methods will actually be able to help these countries to be able to develop. As mentioned by my first speaker, focusing on economic growth by putting fundings into infrastructures and overall healthcare for a country will be able to push the country towards the title of first world, right? And political ties are incredibly important because we think that instead of intentionally making our country a threat by actively going in guns blazing and suddenly increasing the said military in question to prepare for a war that is actually yet to exist, we think that to properly discuss with other countries and to commit to relationships to solve the problem in your country is actually a far better option, right? We tell you that by having political ties and diplomatic relationships, we tell you, unlike your side, who risks this in who risk the entire of the Asian bloc, we will actually be able to strengthen these countries' defenses without harming the country itself, as mentioned by my first speaker, right? We have told you that militarization is neither beneficial or sustainable. We have told you that this will most likely cause conflict and a barrier between these Asian countries with other countries and make these Asian countries seem like a threat, which is in no world a good thing, right? Then they bring the same delusional idea from their first speaker to their second by telling us how they want to simply do this because they are naive and the only expect the one thing, and that is the worst of the worst to occur, right? Yet they have actually completely ignored how the people on the ground will actually feel. First, you already don't help them, then you throw your funds at the military and tell them it's to prepare for doomsday, right? Okay, so at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, we want the same goal, and that is we want Asian bloc to prosper, right? We tell you, and if you want a world where the Asian bloc will actually be able to prosper, not only in its national security, but also in its economy and political standpoint, side with us.
All right, thank you so much, that speaker from opposition side, for that speech. I would like to now invite the reply speaker from opposition team to deliver their reply speech. Here.
Okay. Audible, right? Just confirm again.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Proposition's entire priority wasn't to de-escalate issues, but was to rather prove to us why militarization was the only way to protect the ASEAN bloc when we've given countless of alternatives where they are safer and better in the long run. They claim that militarization is the piece of ASEAN, that you get better protection. But I asked the proposition and panels, what kind of world do you live in where people are oppressed? What kind of world do you live in where countries are threatened through economic sanctions? They don't protect anyone on their side. They just harm sovereignty instead. I'm going to talk about a few things in this reply. Firstly, let us just highlight a strategic flaw at the top of the debate, because the proposition's entire case rests on the assumption that militarization leads to protection and unity in the ASEAN. Their arguments about facing external threats or deterring global powers protecting the ASEAN are based on the idea that every state in the ASEAN bloc would benefit equally from increased militarization. But as we've shown already throughout our 3 speakers, this assumption falls flat for 2 reasons. Because firstly, ASEAN has never been a unified bloc militarily, and secondly, their proposal directly contradicts ASEAN's long-standing commitment to peaceful diplomacy. So insofar as we've demonstrated that militarization fragments rather than unites, their entire case collapses. We gave you few winning ideas that were independent on their own. Firstly, on the principle of non-militarization and ASEAN unity, because at the heart of this debate, the fundamental principle of ASEAN's creation is regional cooperation through diplomacy and not forced militarization. The proposition has completely neglected how deeply entrenched this principle is in the ASEAN framework. Since its inceptions, ASEAN has prided itself on fostering the peace and stability of the dialogue and not about militarization. They claim that military force will safeguard ASEAN from external influences, but they overlook that these very external powers are far more likely to respond with hostility instead to a militarized bloc, escalating the tensions rather than resolving them on their side of the house. But moreover, we've already explained why militarization would create a security dilemma, where the neighboring powers, such as China or India, right, would feel compelled to respond with increased military capabilities of their own. Thus, you create a regional arms race. You create no peace on their side of the house. But even if you don't buy that, let's talk about the efficiency of Asian diplomacy versus demilitarization. Because how does their world really function compared to ours? They want to make you believe that military might necessarily, is necessary for ASEAN to defend themselves, particularly against its large powers. But this just completely ignores how ASEAN has successfully maintained its neutrality for decades now, right? We've seen that in status quo. And in fact, ASEAN has brokered critical agreements with both China and the United States precisely because it is viewed as a neutral party. It never wanted to harm anyone. Like, consider the South China Sea disputes. We already talked about this, where ASEAN's diplomatic efforts have been essential in tempering these conflicts. We've seen key successes through multilateral tasks and the development of code in conduct in the South China Sea. So if ASEAN suddenly becomes a militarized bloc, that diplomatic leverage evaporates into the air. Instead of being neutral, you stabilize force in the region, and ASEAN becomes a combatant that is very conflicts it seeks to meditate. But even if you don't buy that, let us talk about the impacts about stability, diplomacy, and long-term peace, right? Let's talk about it. So if ASEAN militarizes, you don't just get increased military spending, you get a total shift in priorities, because money that could have gone into economic development, poverty reduction, or even environmental sustainability, issues that are critical for many ASEAN nations, would instead go into maintaining these armies, to to purchasing weapons that they don't even need to protect their country and building military infrastructure. That's why the lives of everyday citizens who rely on peaceful cooperation between ASEAN countries for stability and trade would be directly affected. Because on our comparative, ASEAN continues to focus on economic growth, your regional cooperation, and sustainable development, which are far more pressing issues for the majority of its population rather than militarization. Because countries like Vietnam, countries like Indonesia, and Philippines have all benefited massively from this collaborative, non-militarized, by the way, using diplomacy and economic agreements to build stronger ties to make ASEAN what it is now. Militarization would undo decades of progress. Militarization will undermine the very foundation that has made ASEAN a success story. SAS will proceed to the finals. Excellent comparison.
All right, thank you so much. The reply speech from the opposition team. Now to end the debate, I would like to invite the reply speaker from proposition team to end the debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I feel like the main issue to this debate is like no security versus escalate, because the side of opposition is keeping on telling us that we are going to provoke the other countries and causing much more worse without even telling us why will that come to happen in the first place. Because we already told you that we don't see if a country or a regional bloc is trying to make or form a new thing, such as a new military cooperation, then the other country will suddenly try to cut ties and attack it. They never even proved to us in the first place. So we say that on their world, they will have no security and something that they are so keen on defending. Because they told us that under their world, they want to continue with diplomacy in order to resolve issues. And they keep on dismissing the fact that right now, ASEAN is facing a lot of conflicts and potential impending threats. For example, we told you many times about the South China Sea disputes, which could potentially harm ASEAN. They are so guaranteed that the ASEAN will not even be threatened at the end of the day. But we say that with this on our side, we can at least have a stabilized type of protection in order to defend the whole economic bloc in the first place. What I'm going to tell you in my speech is that what we say and what the opposition also said in the debate, right? So we told you few things in our speeches, right? We told you what is the necessity for the militarization in the ASEAN bloc, and also the harms of not militarizing, and why is it in the interest of ASEAN itself to militarize, right? Okay, so right now, basically, what the side of opposition has told us in today's debate is how threaten the sovereignty of ASEAN and the diversity cannot really make this come to happen. But we say that these are pretty much just an assumption, because they want to compare this to NATO, right? But we told you that NATO is much bigger organization, which consists of more differences of ideologies. There are more stark differences between liberalism and conservatism ideologies between the economic bloc, which potentially in their case could hinder this from coming to happen, right? But we said that this is much more possible if you want to do in ASEAN, because right now ASEAN has similar things, for example, the goal in the ASEAN countries, and for the economic goals and stabilities. So we say that ASEAN is the bloc that actually needs more military, because right now they don't even have the stable military in the first place, because they are consisted of smaller countries which are not even having a very professional military exercise, and they are depending only on sole country. We say that the side of opposition didn't really tackle at all regarding our points regarding how it's going to burden a single country, which we for example Indonesia, which we have mentioned, right? They never really proved to us why this type of harms wouldn't come to happen. We told you that without militarization, it is going to strain an individual country by putting a burden on the country to protect the whole ASEAN economics and causing an imbalanced military spending, because now only that specific country have to spend right now. We say that firstly that's an inequality, and also it causes a staggering in the whole economic bloc, given that right now ASEAN is interdependent economic bloc, right? So when one country is so dependent over other countries, it is going to strain the whole economic bloc, is going to affect. So right now we told you that we have a better national security, right? we told you that we have a better national security, right? And then they told us they failed to consider that ASEAN's standings right now in the current world is currently being in attention, right? Like, so we believe that under our world, our best case right now, like our worst case is that impacts of militarization escalates where external power are provoked, right? Like they told us that we could provoke. But right now, at least by the time that those external threats is going to get provoked, we right now already have like a stable military power to counter that. Well, on their side, when they told us, oh, it's better to have no protection, right? We say that their side will have more like exposed to potential external threats, and right now they have zero protection. So right now, more countries are going to be attacked under their side with no particular protection at all, right? Because right now, in their best case scenario, there are going to be no protection and continuous tension within the bloc. But on our worst case scenario, the thing is going to get provoked, but at least right now we have a strong base right now. So we see that on our side, we have a better national security, we have a better economic benefits, and no staggering in the economies will also help a balanced protection, contribution, and no regional conflicts. And with that, I'd like to rest my case.
All right, thank you so much, both teams, for the debate. You may virtually cross and shake hands. Again, congratulations, round of applause. I'd like to invite my panelists to move to room 1 for the deliberation. So, we'll meet in room 1.